The World Health Organization has endorsed a protocol for testing African herbal medicines as potential treatments for coronavirus and other epidemics. It has phase 3 of clinical trials assess the safety and efficacy of new products. COVID-19 has raised the issue of using traditional medicines to battle contemporary diseases. Joining me now is Professor Francois Venter. He's the Divisional Director at Ezintsha at Wits University. Good evening and thank you so much for your time, Professor Venter. Does this acknowledgement and this nod from the World Health Organization symbolize a seismic shift in the approach to medicine and perhaps the different knowledge systems that can contribute to modern medicine?
I think I don't think it's that much of a seismic shift. I think WHO has acknowledged the importance of this knowledge base, but more importantly, the importance of doing conventional scientific ways to get these things into people's mouths as tablets or medicines or into people's veins. So it's almost just bringing everyone into the conventional scientific realm. We don't really talk about alternative medicine. We talk about proven medicine or stuff that isn't proven. And that would apply to traditional stuff as well. There have been several compounds over the years which have emerged from traditional and other alternative medicine things which have been found to be useful and have been found to be that can be applied in a scientific way. So we're very pleased with this development. So that means that, but people mustn't underestimate the rigor that it takes to get a medicine from people like the idea to the point of it actually being safe and usable.
Of course, traditional medicine in this context has always been othered within the scientific fraternity. Do you think that this is a step towards changing that?
Yes, I mean, I think you've got to meet people both ways. You need to explain why we need scientific rigor, make sure that the stuff is safe and that it works. You need both of those. On the other hand, not dismissing outright people's experiences with certain medication. We should be seeing these as opportunities to take them forward. So it is kind of meeting each side both ways. I think from my perspective, as like a sort of conventional scientist looking at new drugs and things like that, we want stuff to be coming to us that we can evaluate. From the other side, they want to be taken seriously and want to be thought of providing something useful to the field. So there certainly is a conversation that needs to be had here.
How much attention does somebody like yourself, for instance, pay to the anecdotal evidence that often patients would present around their particular experience, perhaps with some form or another of treatment? Is that now what is needed in order to provide a basis, rather, on which some of the scientific studies can effectively be carried out?
So a lot of my patients will come to me and say, I use X and it makes me feel better. And I say, that sounds fine. I don't know if it's safe or not. And that's the discussion is. I think what's important is that this field is not, I think there's sometimes a sanitized version of what happens out there with what so-called natural medicines. I'm not talking about traditional medicines here. I'm just talking about the field more generally, which is firstly that they're intrinsically safe, which we just don't know, but also that there's not vested interest. In the same way with conventional stuff we buy in the pharmacy, there's lots of people getting rich off that. In the same way, there are lots of other people getting rich off these alternative medications. So people need to be skeptical of both, and what I think we need to be demanding is that if you are going to sell this stuff and make money off it, we have a legitimate interest as a society in making sure that it's safe and that it works. And this is the methodology that we use to use that. And I think WHO coming out and saying this opens the gates to saying, let's have that discussion. How can we do that as easily as possible?
Of course, one of the other dangers then that comes with the mainstreaming of such medication and the inclusion of pharmaceuticals is that you're likely to see, where the studies are successful, skyrocketing prices for some of these treatments.
Yeah, it's part of my activist work is to try and make sure that drugs that do get tested are affordable to the populations that they're getting tested on. We've been actually quite successful in South Africa in doing that, particularly in the antiretroviral field. And more recently, there's been a lot of attention being paid to drugs for COVID, particularly for sick hospitalized patients. So, yes, that's part of a lot of our work is simply throwing up your hands and saying, oh, I've got this alternative medicine or this, this traditional medicine or whatever medicine, and not thinking about how do we get into as many mouths that need it as humanly possible is selling us all short.
The issue that is obviously one that's quite contentious within the medical field, and we're talking pharmaceuticals now, is the issue of patents, right? And here, where you're dealing with traditional medicine, often that idea or the course or the treatment or ingredients that are put in there are shared from one generation to another. And yet, ultimately, if it's going to be patented and produced or manufactured, some person is going to be earning the benefit of that and not necessarily the original scientists who put all of this together.
Yes, and there have been instances of commercial companies pillaging essentially products and just turning them into huge money spinners. I mean, you could actually make the argument about many of the conventional drugs as well, is they're often tested, particularly in the United States, using taxpayers' money. The initial development's done with taxpayers' money. Then the end producer gets to make huge profits off what was actually an investment from the general public. It's not, South Africa unfortunately doesn't invest nearly enough in its own research efforts, but even here, we would need to keep an eye on that. Luckily for South Africa, we've been able, particularly in the antiretroviral field, but increasingly in other areas, negotiate the patents in such a way that actually does benefit us. But it requires focus, and it requires policy focus, and it requires activist focus in terms of making sure that people take that side of things seriously. That people who actually, we need people to be able to make money to make these things sustainable. We need people to be acknowledged for their intellectual input into making these drugs, to doing the preliminary work. But we also need to make sure that the price is low enough that people get the drugs themselves.
Are we likely to see this bridge the gap between professors like yourself and, of course, those who work in the traditional healing space in a very informal way, or what is considered to be an informal way?
So they're obviously an incredibly important sector, and I think a very complex sector. I think often people just look at traditional healers and think, oh gosh, there's this, it's like dealing with cardiologists or nurses, that there's this homogenous group, and they're a very important and very rich part of the landscape. They, however, are very unregulated, and in many ways that also is of concern. So it's great in the sense that people can get access to services, but it's not so great when it comes to accountability. So again, I think South Africa hasn't quite got that right. There's a lot of policy discussions around traditional healers, about traditional medication, about alternative medication as well, which are very complicated. If you walk into a pharmacy today, you have to run probably 50 meters of snake oil before you get to the back end of the prescription where you're going to get it. All that stuff is, the evidence based on safety and efficacy on that stuff is actually relatively small. So you might be buying your product X that was manufactured by herb producer Y that you can buy simply over the counter, and we don't know whether that stuff is not, what the safety of it is, also not whether it's effective or not. And then you get to the counter and you can buy product X where we know that very, very well. So it's this weird situation that the world finds itself in, where some things have got a great scientific base behind them and some don't.
And of course, when we look at alternative medicine, it is increasing in popularity because people do have the sense that, the more we take these over-the-counter drugs, we're in fact killing our bodies more than we're helping them. There's this organic craze that, of course, has also gripped the country. And depending on, or not the country, the world really, and depending on which generation you belong to, you either prioritize organic food and other, products, or you don't. And so you raise the issue of being skeptical. What are the questions that we need to be asking, even when we are looking at alternative medicine options that we think, hey, maybe this is the healthier alternative?
So, my profession colludes in this as well, and there are lots of people who collude in making this as difficult as possible. I think the first question I would say is when you're taking something, especially if it's not directly prescribed by a health professional, ask who's getting rich, who's making money off this, why is this being pushed to me? And I say you can do this with your gym membership, you can do it with the herbal supplement that you're taking, you can take it with the vitamin C supplement that you're taking, that you can buy off the shelf. The second question then after that is, does it make me feel better? Because a lot of my patients, particularly in the early phase of the HIV epidemic, would be taking stuff and they would say, I'm spending 200 Rand a month on this stuff because somebody told me it works. And I would say, but does it make you feel better? And half the time they would just stop because that would be what they would need to have. And then I would do my due diligence. I would go make sure that there are conventional medical sites that, the Department of Health sites, the CDC, the NHS in the UK are very useful resources. Don't go to the crackpot sites. Go to the conventional medical sites and say, is the stuff mentioned there? And if it's mentioned, how are they mentioning it? Is it something that they say is safe? Do they say it's tested? Just be skeptical. I think that if you're going to put something into your body, it's really important that you're confident that you're not hurting yourself.